Hey guys, welcome to Grey Sheep and Hedge Wizards, my Song of Ice and Fire show, where I talk about a Song of Ice and Fire. I'm apples and dragons, like the food and the lizard. Today's topic is going to be a continuation of last time. Rhaego Targaryen, Daenerys Targaryen, Mirri Maz Duur, Khal Drogo, a prophecy, and a kidnapping. So let's go to a Game of Thrones, chapter Daenerys IX. In the Blue Book, it's page 628. It begins, "Winds shadowed her fever dreams." You don't want to wake the dragon, do you? Haha. This is part 4 of the Rhaego Mirri Maz Duur series. So if you haven't seen the first 3 parts, make sure you watch those first. Oh, and if you haven't read A Song of Ice and Fire, you need to go away, right now. I'm going to spoil everything. So last time, I talked about the metatext of this mystery, and how the metatext of this mystery points to a certain attitude in the audience, a general dismissiveness of Dothraki culture and the Dothraki people. Because one of the major reasons that we didn't notice that Rhaego was kidnapped, despite us being able to go back and trip over clues for it in practically every other paragraph, was because I didn't consider how strong the Dothraki's motivations would be to kidnap him, because he's their prophesized savior figure, the stallion who mounts the world, who they've apparently been waiting for decades, if not centuries. But of course, none of the Dothraki people have been alive for centuries. So the stallion who mounts the world prophecy has been passed down through Dothraki culture, from one generation to the next, each generation hoping that they'll be the generation that gets to witness and be part of the birth of their savior figure and see it happen in real time. So you can imagine how the Dothraki people felt when the Dosh Khaleen said, "This is the stallion who mounts the world," in Daenerys' belly. So it's no wonder they stole him away in secret when he was born, and why virtually all of them were involved, right down to Dany's handmaidens. And it's no wonder why Mirri went along with it, because she's surrounded by Dothraki people, who probably wouldn't appreciate Mirri giving away their plan to kidnap Dany's baby. And then we looked at some other Daenerys scenes in A Game of Thrones, to see how the kidnapping recontextualizes those scenes. For example, before Daenerys puts herself into the fire of Drogo's funeral pyre, she tries to get the 3 men of her Khas to become her blood riders, as if she's a Khal, and they all refuse her, but she gives each one of them one of the 3 priceless weapons that she got as a wedding gift. So the weapons are apparently some sort of bribe, to try to get these Dothraki to overlook their tradition that only a man can be a Khal, or name a co, or have blood riders. For clarity, a Khal is a leader of a Khalasar. A co is his general. His blood riders are his personal guard, and a Khas is the personal guard of anybody except the Khal. The blood riders are required to kill themselves when their Khal dies, to go into the afterlife that they call the Nightlands with their Khal. And a Khas is not required to kill themselves if the person they're guarding dies. Dothraki hierarchy can be a little confusing, so I thought it would be helpful to clarify some of the terms. As Daenerys was giving the men the weapons, the third one of them, Rhaego, refused her just like the first 2, but then he told her that he would escort her safely to Vaes Dothrak, beneath the Mother of Mountains, to join the Dosh Khaleen. And Dany just kind of ignored him. But when I suppose that Rhaego knew about the kidnapping, it seems like what was happening in that scene was that Daenerys was still technically a Khaleesi, and so she still had the authority of a Khaleesi, which means that she has the power to command basically anything she wants, including the execution of anybody who displeases her, which she has already done when she ordered her Khas to kill Khal Drogo's blood riders. And when I put myself in the shoes of her Khas, and I suppose that her Khas is in on the plan to kidnap Rhaego, and knows that Rhaego is in Vaes Dothrak waiting for Daenerys, a likely reason that Rhaego and the other men of her Khas didn't tell her that Rhaego was waiting for her at Vaes Dothrak is because she still had the authority of a Khaleesi, and they were probably hoping that once they got her to Vaes Dothrak, and she was reunited with her baby, and joined the Dosh Khaleen, she would no longer have that authority. And so even if her anger about her baby being kidnapped outweighed her happiness of being reunited with her baby, she wouldn't be able to do anything to them about it. And her Khas would be free to join a different khalasar and move on with their lives. So in this episode, I want to talk about some more scenes that get recontextualized after you know that Rhaego is alive. And I want to go further and try to extract some guidelines or rules of engagement that could help me solve other mysteries in the story in other places. And then if there's still time, I'm going to apply that knowledge to one of the story's most mysterious dreams. So that's the plan for today. Let's see if we can get it done. Page 631. My son, Rhaego, where is he? I want him. Her handmaid lowered her eyes. The boy, he did not live, Khaleesi. Her voice was a frightened whisper. Dany released her wrist. My son is dead, she thought, as Jaqi left the tent. She had known somehow. She had known since she woke the first time to Jaqui's tears. No, she had known before she woke. Her dream came back to her, sudden and vivid, and she remembered the tall man with the copper skin and long silver gold braid, bursting into flame. She should weep, she knew, yet her eyes were dry as ash. She had wept in her dream, and the tears had turned to steam on her cheeks. All the grief has been burned out of me, she told herself. She felt sad, and yet she could feel Rhaego receding from her, as if he had never been. So that is Daenerys' interpretation of one part of her dream, her very long dream that she has right at the beginning of this chapter. In the scene when Dany tells Mirri Maz Duur to go ahead and do the blood magic, she asks about what the blood magic will cost, what the price is. Mirri Maz Duur tells her that only life can pay for death, which is a really vague statement, but apparently not untrue, because she did kill a horse to do the ritual. Khal Drogo's red stallion. But then Dany puts her hand on her pregnant belly, and she asks, my life? And Mirri says, no, not your life, Khaleesi. So to judge by Dany's body language, where she touches her pregnant belly, apparently she suspected that the life that the blood magic would take was her baby's. And if you wanted to, you could reread Dany's story from the time she gets pregnant all the way up to that scene and find other times where she did this gesture of putting her hand on her stomach. And when you do that, what you find is that the only time Dany does this is when she's afraid for her baby, when there's some perceived threat toward her baby. And so that's how you can prove that that's what that meant when Dany did it for the final time in that scene with Mirri. It meant that Dany perceived a threat to her baby, meaning that she thought that the price of the blood magic would be the life of her baby. But in retrospect, I can see that the life price of the blood magic was really just the horse, because baby Rhaego's still alive. His life wasn't taken at all. So we've just exonerated Mirri Maz Duur of the crime of tricking Dany into killing her own baby. And in part 2, I went into depth about the subtext of Mirri's lines right after Dany learns that her baby is dead. And she blames Mirri for killing her baby. And Mirri's responses are interesting because they straddle the interpretation between retaliatory and neutral, where the first time we read those lines, we tend to read the subtext of them, where the subtext sounds like Mirri is saying a bunch of really mean things about what happened to Dany and her baby and her husband. Like, you deserve this. and the world is a better place now that your husband and your son are dead. But now that I know that Rhaego is alive, and that Mirri Maz Duur knows that Rhaego is alive, those subtextual interpretations of Mirri's responses completely die. If Mirri knows that Rhaego is alive, then it makes absolutely no sense for those to be Mirri's intended subtexts with those lines. The only way it could make sense is if Mirri is trying to get herself killed. So since it's more reasonable to assume that Mirri is not trying to get herself killed than to assume that she is, the neutral interpretation of Mirri's responses wins the battle of which interpretation of Mirri's responses is the canonical interpretation. What she actually meant when she said, "The stallion who mounts the world will burn those cities now." And I also talked about the House of the Undying vision that describes a man that can only be an adult version of Rhaego Targaryen, because he has the copper skin of the Dothraki and the silver blonde hair of the Targaryen, and he has a burning city at his back. And that vision from the House of the Undying takes on a much more hopeful meaning than it seemed like it did now that I know that Rhaego is alive, and in context of Mirri's comment that now the stallion who mounts the world will burn no cities and trample no nations into dust. To put something behind you means to leave it in your past. And so, in that vision, the burning city being behind Rhaego might mean that Rhaego is going to be the Dothraki leader who leads the Dothraki away from their city-burning ways and towards a less violent future. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about that Rhaego's kidnapping recontextualizes is that part of Dany's dream right at the beginning of this chapter. So let me read that. Page 629. Don't want to wake the dragon. She could feel the heat inside her, a terrible burning in her womb. Her son was tall and proud, with Drogo's copper skin and her own silver gold hair, violet eyes shaped like almonds. And he smiled for her and began to lift his hand toward hers. But when he opened his mouth, the fire poured out. She saw his heart burning through his chest, and in an instant he was gone, consumed like a moth by a candle, turned to ash. She wept for her child, the promise of a sweet mouth on her breast, but her tears turned to steam as they touched her skin. Want to wake the dragon. So that's the part of Dany's dream that she's referring to when she thinks to herself, no, she had known before she woke. Her dream came back to her, sudden and vivid, and she remembered the tall man with the copper skin and long silver gold braid bursting into flame. She should weep, she knew, yet her eyes were dry as ash. She had wept in her dream, and the tears had turned to steam on her cheeks. All the grief has been burned out of me, she told herself. She felt sad, and yet she could feel Rhaego receding from her, as if he had never been. So after Dany thinks that Rhaego is dead, she interprets that part of her dream to mean that Rhaego is dead. And as the reader reading this for the first time, we interpret it the same way. We didn't have any more knowledge than Dany does, and we tend to go along with Dany's interpretations because we're inside Dany's POV. So our interpretation of that part of the dream tends to be the same one. The dream was a sort of prophecy that foretold Rhaego's death. But now that I'm on the other side of the Rhaego mystery, I can see that the dream was a sort of prophecy because it foretold something. It foretold that Rhaego and Dany would be separated. That's what's being symbolized when Rhaego and Dany are about to touch hands, and then Rhaego bursts into flame. It symbolizes that Dany won't get to touch her baby. But the dream wasn't really foretelling Rhaego's death. It was foretelling that Dany would refuse to be escorted to Vaes Dothrak, where she would have been reunited with Rhaego. Partly because she didn't want to join the Dash Khaleen, and partly because her power as a Khaleesi at the time resulted in her Khas feeling unsafe to tell her, hey, your baby is at Vaes Dothrak, where we're going to take you. So I know Rhaego's death can't be the right interpretation anymore of that dream, because I know Rhaego didn't die. So what I can see was really happening with this dream is that it was a manifestation of Dany's fear at the time. As Dany's body language suggested when she touched her pregnant belly, she was afraid that the cost of the blood magic would be her baby's life. She carried that fear when she went to sleep. Then she had this dream where her son burst into flame, right before she could touch him. So Dany's interpretation of that scene in the dream is, my son is dead because I disregarded the Dothraki warnings against blood magic. But the right interpretation was, I'm going to do some dumb shit and disregard the Dothraki again, and because of that, I won't get to meet Rhaego for a long time. And something I want to point out that happened with this dream is the way the readers approached it compared to the way we should have approached it. We approached it asking questions like, what do these images mean for the end game of A Song of Ice and Fire? What does Rhaego symbolize? What does fire symbolize? What does everything in it symbolize? But we would have made more progress in all regards if we had approached it asking more down-to-earth questions like, how do these images relate to what Dany is going through right now? To what she was doing and feeling in the moments or days before she went to sleep? This is when I slapped myself in the forehead and said, duh, that is how dreams work in real life. The stuff I dream about obviously tends to relate to whatever stuff I'm going through at the time. Why didn't I assume it would be the same in the story? Well, because it's a story. Putting myself in Dany's shoes requires more effort than putting myself in my own shoes. I'm already in my shoes, so I don't have to do anything for that. To put myself in Dany's shoes, I have to pay attention to her emotions, thoughts, words, body language, subtext, and so on. So what I can do is I can learn from this whole Wake the Dragon dream and Rhaego situation and extract this lesson from it. The lesson that I should approach dreams in A Song of Ice and Fire, looking at them in terms of character psychology, and then try to interpret other dreams in the story the same way. And maybe I'll be able to develop my understanding of those dreams, and maybe the mysteries surrounding them too. So let's do it. Let's apply what we learned here to a dream that was had by Jon Snow. It's the one where Jon goes down into the Winterfell crypts. And there's something spooky down there, but there's no telling what it is. Before you get too excited, I'll tell you now, I'm not going to walk you all the way to the right answer. But I'll walk you closer to it than the popular theories about it will. Cough cough, Rhaegar's harp. 224. Here's Samwell. I'm on page 224 in the Blue Book. Or 286 in this one. Check out this picture of Samwell Tarly. Very nice guy. Insufferably cowardly. It says, Jon Snow laughed with him. All the guys are at Castle Black sword training. And Alliser Thorne is being Alliser Thorne. And he sends 3 guys to fight Jon, and Jon is defending Sam, because Sam just got his butt kicked. And then afterwards, Sam and Jon go off alone, and they're sort of getting to know each other and having a personal conversation. Sam starts crying, and Jon's direwolf ghost starts to lick his tears to make him feel better. And then his crying turns to laughter. And it says, Jon Snow laughed with him. Afterward, they sat on the frozen ground, huddled in their cloaks with ghosts between them. Jon told the story of how he and Robb had found the pups newborn in the late summer snows. It seemed 1,000 years ago now. Before long, he found himself talking of Winterfell. Sometimes I dream about it, he said. I'm walking down this long empty hall. My voice echoes all around, but no one answers. So I walk faster, opening doors, shouting names. I don't even know who I'm looking for. Most nights it's my father, but sometimes it's Rob instead, or my little sister Arya, or my uncle. The thought of Benjen Stark saddened him. His uncle was still missing. The old bear had sent out rangers in search of him. Sir Jeremy Riker had led 2 sweeps, and Corin Halfhand had gone forth from the Shadow Tower, but they'd found nothing aside from a few blazes in the trees that his uncle had left to mark his way. In the stony highlands to the northwest, the marks stopped abruptly, and all trace of Ben Stark vanished. "Do you ever find anyone in your dream?" Sam asked. Jon shook his head. "No one. The castle is always empty." He had never told anyone of the dream, and he did not understand why he was telling Sam now. Yet somehow it felt good to talk of it. "Even the ravens are gone from the rookery, and the stables are full of bones. That always scares me. I start to run then, throwing open doors, climbing the tower 3 steps at a time, screaming for someone, for anyone. And then I find myself in front of the door to the crypts. It's black inside, and I can see the steps spiraling down. Somehow I know I have to go down there, but I don't want to. I'm afraid of what might be waiting for me. The old kings of winter are down there, sitting on their thrones with stone wolves at their feet and iron swords across their laps. But it's not them I'm afraid of. I scream that I'm not a Stark, that this isn't my place, but it's no good. I have to go anyway, so I start down, feeling the walls as I descend, with no torch to light the way. It gets darker and darker, until I want to scream." He stopped, frowning, embarrassed. "That's when I always wake. His skin cold and clammy, shivering in the darkness of his cell. Ghost would leap up beside him, his warmth as comforting as daybreak. He would go back to sleep with his face pressed into the direwolf's shaggy white fur. "Do you dream of Horn Hill?" Jon asked. So there's Jon's dream. It's not a dream we get to see firsthand, but his description of it is very detailed. There's a lot to talk about in it. So let's take a look at what the other readers are saying about it. This topic is from 1 year ago, December 2021. It says, "What is Jon Snow afraid of, in your opinion? What is your headcanon for what is hidden in the deepest part of the crypts?" This person says, "I always thought his vision was trying to show him his true parentage, but his subconscious was fighting it." This one says, "It's an odd description to be sure. He's not afraid of the Stark kings, and he yells that he isn't a Stark. Whatever Jon feels afraid of should be something that a Stark would fear. Why else insist you aren't a Stark? He seems more afraid he won't ever get back out if he goes in." I think Jon is connecting to someone in the crypt that wasn't a Stark, a spirit of someone already there. Rather than a secret about Jon, I think it's a secret about the Starks. It makes the most sense to me, given the context of his language and actions in the dream. This one says, "It's not something literal. Jon is a bastard. He's not a Stark. Only Starks are meant to go into the crypts. It's either issues with accepting his state as a bastard, or he's picking up that he's a secret Targaryen." Another one says, "A dark truth about Starks and their history with the others. It's not a coincidence the Starks have so many similarities to the others. Maybe even something about the Ice Dragon." Another says, "He's not a Stark and the Targ Kings know that. That's probably why he feels he doesn't belong there." Another says, "There are only 2 people in the crypts who are neither kings in the north or Lord of Winterfell, Lyanna and Brandon. Apparently that's who he's afraid of." Given that the only thing he says in his dreams is about his parentage, I'd say he's afraid of something linked with Brandon or Lyanna, and with Jon's parentage. Which thankfully leads us back to one of the most popular theories about A Song of Ice and Fire. I think he's referring to R plus L equals J there. You got that confused. Only the King of Winter and later the Lords get a statue next to their tomb, but all Starks are buried in the crypts. He's right, all Starks are buried in the crypts. The only thing that did different was that he gave Brandon and Lyanna statues, regardless that they were not lords or kings, because he loved them. This one says, I think he's going to find the Night's King or something along those lines. The Night's King was a Stark, so he could be down there. So you probably noticed by now that most of these theories approach the dream in terms of what it means for the end game, the big spectacular end game of A Song of Ice and Fire. The dream is about Jon as a secret Targaryen. The dream is about the Night King, who's down there in the crypt. The dream is about the others and the Stark's history with the others. Some people are approaching it from a character's psychology point of view, and trying to see what it means for Jon and his fears at the time. But there's an unmistakable tendency to try to think about it in terms of A Song of Ice and Fire's big, spectacular endgame reveals, and they're big heroes and big name figures and things like that. This thread is from May 2022. The true meaning of Jon's crypt dreams. Jon's crypt dreams are foreshadowing his death at the end of A Dance with Dragons, and the fact that he won't actually belong in the Winterfell crypts, because he won't truly be dead. He'll have warged into ghosts and awaiting resurrection. More endgame theorizing. Major character death, warg body swapping. Resurrection. Some commenters say maybe Rhaegar's harp is down there, or maybe the secret of Jon Snow's parentage is carved in the stone, and Jon just needs to go down there and read it. This post from 2 years ago, the person waiting for Jon in the crypts, says the Night King is buried down there, and Jon needs to find the Night King. This one from 7 years ago, February 2016. Jacaerys sealed the Pact of Ice and Fire with Vermax's eggs, which were laid deep within the crypts of Winterfell. These eggs were the inheritance for the would-be descendants of the Pact. Since Jon is the sole child of Ice and Fire, the eggs are actually his birthright. Jon's a Targaryen, and he's going to get some dragon eggs. That's what the dream is about. Now let's apply what Rhaego's kidnapping taught us about how to interpret Dany's dream. Try to approach dreams asking simpler questions, like, what is the character feeling right now? What's he going through? What major life change is he in the middle of? And how could that inform the meaning of the dream? In this chapter where Jon describes his dream to Sam, Jon is at Castle Black after having left home for the first time. So Jon's right at the beginning of a major life change. He's left home for the first time. He's separated from his family and friends, everyone and everything he's ever truly known. And if Jon were a true-born son, he wouldn't have had to leave. He would have been allowed to stay there and live in Winterfell for the rest of his life. So Jon grew up knowing that he's a bastard, and that this day would someday come, where his presence at Winterfell would become more and more inappropriate as he gets older. So he's going to have to go out into the world and make his own place in it, somehow, somewhere, and be removed from all of the structures and wealth and security of castle life at Winterfell. The dream starts out, I'm walking down this long empty hall. My voice echoes all around, but no one answers, so I walk faster, opening doors, shouting names. So in the dream, Jon is apparently looking for his family, in Winterfell, and there's nobody there. He can't find them. So Winterfell is empty. And Winterfell being empty represents Jon's fear of being alone, of being separated from his family, and all the fears that are associated with that. Of what if I can't make it on my own? How am I going to find new friends and make new relationships as meaningful as these ones? And what if I'm not welcome back here after I leave? If I am welcome back, when will be the next time that I get to visit my family? All these sorts of things are what Winterfell being empty in the dream represents. Jon says, I don't even know who I'm looking for. Most nights it's my father, but sometimes it's Robb instead, or my little sister Arya, or my uncle. So in case there is any doubt about what he's looking for, he just tells us. It's his family, basically. More particularly the family members that he loves the most. Ned, Robb, and Arya, and Benjen. It's hard to imagine Bran and Rickon aren't in that mix as well. The thought of Benjen Stark saddened him. His uncle was still missing. Then his thoughts about Benjen interrupt the dream, and he continues with the dream. So after Jon learns that Winterfell is completely empty, he finds himself at the entrance of the Crypt. And he feels like he has to go down there, even though he doesn't want to, because he's afraid of what might be waiting for him down there. He knows the old kings of winter are down there, but it's not them he's afraid of. So the mystery remains, what is it that Jon's afraid of? He screams that he's not a Stark and that this is not his place, but it's no good and he has to go anyway. And so another mystery is, why does he have to go anyway? What is it in Jon's mind that makes him feel like he has to go down into the crypt and confront a scary thing down there? It's dark, he has no torch, he has to feel the walls just to move around, and it gets darker and darker as he goes. The increasing darkness suggesting that whatever it is he has to confront is worse than he thought the closer he gets to it. Now put yourself in Jon's shoes. You've grown up knowing that you're a bastard of Ned Stark, and that someday you're going to have to leave the comfort of your family and the castle and make your own way in the world. You also know that your siblings are not going to have to do those things. They can just live in this castle forever if they don't have to do anything. Even though they probably should join some kind of order or something. At least the ones that are not going to inherit the castle. But unlike Jon, their continued presence at Winterfell is not going to become more inappropriate as they get older. Where there's a stigma against bastardy that comes from the fact that inheritance is done through blood relationship. And so a bastard having the blood of the Lord makes him a potential threat to his trueborn sons. Or if it turns out that the people in the castle and around the court like the bastard better than the trueborn heir, they could start vying and positioning to basically usurp the trueborn heir's inheritance and manipulate situations so that the bastard gets it instead. And if that starts to happen, that could turn into a bloody claim dispute that could send the whole family into ruins and put all of House Stark at risk. Which also won't be very good for the small folk who depend on the Lord family being intact and functional, and not having to be enlisted in a battle and a violent claim dispute over whose right it is to sit on the throne of Winterfell. And throughout Jon's life, there's no doubt that he's wondered before who his mother is, and that he's asked his father who she is. But Ned won't tell Jon who his mother is. So Jon, as a kid, even though he's a kid, he would still be able to detect that there's some kind of dark secret about his mother, or his parentage in general, that his father won't tell him. And then when I refer to his father, Ned, and I look at his father's thoughts about Jon and his mother, and all those mysterious events that surround the whole era of Jon's birth, I can see that there's enough complexity in the situation that The answers to who Jon's parents are and why Ned won't tell him could be a great number of things. And I can also see that Ned's thoughts about it are understandably saturated in sadness, because we know that Lyanna Stark died. But they're less understandably saturated in guilt. Given the official story that Rhaegar kidnapped and raped Lyanna, it isn't so clear why the subject of Jon's mother should make Ned feel guilty. It's a little understandable because people sometimes feel guilty about things irrationally, or you have things like survivor's guilt and just a general feeling like you could have been in the right place at the right time. If you had foreseen what was going to happen better, or maybe guilt that you didn't foresee what was going to happen, even though there were some clues in front of you to help you figure it out. But considering that Rhaegar's kidnap and rape of Lyanna was apparently a shock to everyone, the question remains wide open of why does Ned feel guilty about the subject of Jon Snow's mother, if Jon Snow's mother is Lyanna Stark and his father is Rhaegar Targaryen. So no matter how we cut the situation, there's a mismatch going on, either between Jon Snow's parentage being Rhaegar and Lyanna and Ned's guilt, where the guilt doesn't seem to belong, or between Jon Snow's parentage and the reader's interpretation of Ned Stark's thoughts, where in that case there is no guilt. As in, maybe we're mistaken that Ned feels any guilt at all, and really the only emotion at play is sadness, for Lyanna or just the situation in general. When I put myself in child Jon's point of view, and suppose that every time Jon asked about his mother, he also detected in Ned a mixture of sadness and guilt, Jon detecting Ned's guilt about Jon Snow's mother is probably the origin of Jon's fear in this dream, where he's going down into the Winterfell Crypt, the Stark's ancestral burial place that represents the history of House Stark. And apparently Jon has detected that in House Stark's history, there's a dark secret that he needs to confront, but he doesn't know what it is. So even though that explanation of Jon's dream doesn't directly tell us what that secret is, compared to most of the alternative theories that we looked at, it moves the origin point of Jon's fear in the dream from the external world to Jon's internal world, and his literal past as a bastard of House Stark, and his relationship with Ned, and Ned's feelings about Jon's parentage, which seems to direct me to take a closer look in consideration of Ned's feelings about Jon's parentage. And that is a much better way to start thinking about and researching the mysteries of Jon Snow's parentage and Ned's guilt and what happened to Lyanna and all these sorts of things at the center of A Song of Ice and Fire's mysteries. And in A Storm of Swords, Jon 8, I think, the dream gets an expansion right at the opening. He dreamt he was back in Winterfell, limping past the stone kings on their thrones. Their gray granite eyes turned to follow him as he passed, and their gray granite fingers tightened on the hilts of the rusted swords upon their laps. "You are no Stark," he could hear them mutter in heavy granite tones. "There is no place for you here. Go away." He walked deeper into the darkness. "Father?" he called. "Bran? Rickon?" No one answered. A chill wind was blowing on his neck. "Uncle?" he called. "Uncle Benjen! Father! Please, Father, help me!" Up above he heard drums. "They are feasting in the great hall, but I am not welcome there. I am no Stark, and this is not my place." His crutch slipped, and he fell to his knees. The crypts were growing darker. A light has gone out somewhere. "Egret," he whispered. Forgive me, please. But it was only a direwolf, gray and ghastly, spotted with blood, his golden eyes shining sadly through the dark. So with this dream, as with the dreams before it, I recommend trying to interpret it in terms of what Jon feels and thinks and is going through at the time that the dream is happening, as opposed to what the external objective truth might be about the questions brought up in this dream. And that's where I'm going to call it an end today. As always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you next time.